And Craig Smoak.
Louie Vaccher, WildcatReport.com, Northwestern. He has, of course, been covering the story. A minute ago was a part of the Big Ten Network as this Northwestern story has blown up in less than a week. And, Louie, thank you for your time with Paul Craig, and I'm David Smoak. So when did it kind of like become part of your radar? Was this about the time when everybody else found out about it, or was this simmering somewhere in Chicago?
No, I mean, it was when everybody else found out about it. Really, the first inkling was on Friday when they announced it was a 2-week suspension, so we didn't think too much of it at the time. We knew this hazing investigation was going on in the background, but I had heard things that, it wasn't going to amount to much. And then when the 2-week vacation, right, the 2-week suspension in July when nothing's going on, it's even a recruiting dead period, it looked like it was nothing much. And then Saturday is when it really exploded, when the Daily Northwestern had that story with all these allegations from a former player and corroborated by another former player. And that's when the frenzy started, and it, the fire just slowly grew. And by Monday, that was the end of Pat Fitzgerald. It was surreal. It really was.
So, Lee, one of the questions we kind of just asked was this law firm hired to investigate this, or are they hired to make it go away? Because the suspension feels like a make it go away kind of a thing.
Well, I mean, we don't really know that because the report has not been released, right? They released an executive summary which said, that there were evidence that the hazing went on, but that Pat Fitzgerald, there wasn't evidence to suggest he knew about it. But then, it wasn't until the next day that Dr. Schill, the president, said, maybe it's what he should have known that he will get and could further the sanctions, and that's what eventually brought him down. But that report we'd sure like to see. Maggie Hickey, the person leading the investigation, she's the former investigator general for the state of Illinois. It's a high-powered law firm. They talked, I think it was 50 people within the program. It was a 6-month investigation, and you got to think if that law firm, they had to unearth at least what the Daily Northwestern did, right? I mean, so the president had that information and handed down a 2-week suspension. It wasn't until the story broke and went public that he came back and said, well, maybe I'll extend that a little bit, So it certainly does. It certainly looks like Northwestern tried to sweep it under the rug a little bit because they didn't think the details would come out.
Yeah, they were trying to protect him, right? Pat Fitzgerald, legacy, former player, successful coach despite last season. Were they trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, even if they maybe knew more?
Yeah, I mean, I think not only that, but it's, nobody wanted, look, Fitz is a beloved figure, probably the most popular athlete, maybe all time at Northwestern. When you take a look at what he did as a player and he's the all-time winningest coach, I mean, he's an icon. He is Northwestern football. And you've got a first-year school president and a second-year athletic director, that are making a decision on the most popular person that, he is the face of Northwestern for everyone, really. I mean, so there's a lot of political things involved here. It took a lot to decide to fire a guy like that. And, and then now the upshot of this is, Dr. Schill did that about face. First it was 2 weeks, and then 2 days later he's fired, and now Fitz is filing suit. He's hired a very high-profile Chicago attorney, and they're going to sue for wrongful termination. And I think Dr. Schill is going to have to explain why he thought it was 2 weeks and then thought it was worth firing 2 days later. So, it's going to get uglier, I think.
I mentioned Chicago. Obviously, Evanston is the home of Northwestern University, but Chicago right there at the hip. I had a question on the chat room. What have been the reactions? We've seen the letter from the current players that was apparently from all of them. What has been the reaction from former players? Are most of them angry about this, about Fitzgerald no longer the head coach?
Oh, yeah. They're angry. They're hurt. They're sad. I mean, this was, like I said, this is a beloved coach. His ex-players love that guy. And I think they feel that they feel like it was a player that had an axe to grind that made these allegations, and no one's denying that they happened. I think that there are a lot of differing viewpoints on how severe it was and whether it, warranted firing Pat Fitzgerald. I'll tell you, when I got the news, so I was on a walk with my wife, and I got the news. I got the call that he was fired. I happen to have a DM open on Twitter with a former player who graduated more than 10 years ago. And I sent him a tweet that, Pat Fitzgerald's fired. And he said, yeah, I found out about an hour ago. And he said, haven't stopped crying. That was his reaction. That's the way I think players feel betrayed, they're hurt, and they just can't believe that this happened.
So, and again, you don't know the details of the report, but you've got one report corroborated by a player that it got really bad with hazing. Is there a concern that they just don't want more of this stuff to come out, that it was a long time thing and this Shrek's list was a tradition that Pat Fitzgerald had?
Yeah, I mean, there's been several other players that have come out at various stages and confirmed things and said yes. I think there's a total of 11 players that yes, this occurred. And then we had a charge of racism from a former offensive lineman that was quite a while ago. So, once this, and that's what my biggest criticism of the administration here is, they didn't get out front of this and be transparent and come out with that report, redact the names, do what you have to do legally, but get it out there and show this is what we are working with, because what happens is the media creates that frenzy. And then every time a story comes out, and we publish some of them too. I talked to former managers at the school that said, yes, this running of players and the car wash things, yes, they happened, and everyone was aware of it, and they'd be surprised if it didn't, that kind of stuff. It was all coming out, but every time a story came out, a tweet went out, it just added gasoline to the fire, and this thing started going out of control, and you've got people making allegations over Fitz's entire 17-year period. They really needed to get out in front of it, control the narrative, and say, this is what we know, this is why we did what we did. And I think they really botched it, and they look really bad as a result.
Louie, I asked Adam Rittenberg this from ESPN. So it appears now that the entire staff, football, coaching staff, and the support staff will stay intact. And I understand they have a football season. Heck, we're about to be at Big 12 Media Days tomorrow, the next couple of days, then all the other conferences, and then practices start in August. If Fitzgerald's fired and he's the captain of the ship, I get that if that's the reason. What about the rest of the staff that was involved in perhaps knowing this or should have known this?
Yeah, I think that's a valid question. And this is, I think right now it's expediency that I don't know if they have a choice other than retaining everybody, because who are you going to bring in? If you fire everybody, they do have 5 new coaches this year that just came on board in the last few months. So maybe other than that, if you fire everybody, can you bring that many new coaches in and get ready for a season in 2 months? So I think this was really, they were left with no choice. They had to do it, but it certainly looks bad. And if Fitzgerald gets fired for this, well, then what about these coaches? And, they have this no tolerance hazing policy that coaches are mandatory reporters. No one reported anything, so everyone is at least complicit in this. I just think it was they were forced to keep them on because they really didn't feel like they had another choice.
So, Louie,
what
do you see as the next 2 years for this program in going through an interim coaching staff? How attractive will the job be to coaches? I mean, it is a Big Ten job, in one of the Power 2 conferences. But it also, comes with it, a total rebuild job, the stresses of the academic pressures at Northwestern and more. How do you see this playing out over the next year or so?
Over the next 2 years, I don't know what the next 2 days are going to look like. I mean, this thing is spiraling. It seems like every hour on the hour yesterday, this new revelation was coming out. It was crazy. But you mentioned I would think that they're trying to get an interim coach. I don't know if you hire a former coach. The names like Paul Christ are coming out and things like that. I've seen on lists. I don't think you can hire an employed coach right now that's going to come 2 months before the season. That's awfully hard to ask. So if they go interim, right now they've named David Braun the defensive coordinator, who's been here since January, right? Then he came from North Dakota State. This is his first Power 5 job. He's kind of they call him the liaison. He's not even the interim head coach. They don't have one right now. There's no one in the leadership role right now. But you look at Northwestern is always, like you mentioned, the academics. It's always going to be tough from that. Recruiting is always going to be tough at Northwestern. It was always a difficult job, but also the changes to college football landscape with NIL. Northwestern was the last Big Ten school to establish a collective. They're a little bit behind the curve there. With transfers, that brings up academics again. Other than graduates, it's very difficult to get a transfer in through the academic side of things. And then you look at the Big Ten adding USC and UCLA and the West divisions going away. It's going to be tougher and tougher for a school like Northwestern to ever get back to the Big Ten title game. And then on top of that, you got to replace an absolute icon that everybody loved at Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald, the face of the program for decades. So yeah, it's not easy.
Louie, have you heard anything, because we've seen this before, when a school goes through something like this, the next thing you know, there's waves of it, of course, and I'm talking about the protocol. Do you know whether or not Northwestern will open up anyone that's a part of this team or anyone that's signed for the class of 23? Will they allow them to move on somewhere else if they want?
Well, yeah, you got to think so, right? That if there's a coaching change, and, again, we get into the timing of it, right? Two months before the season, how many programs have open scholarships available? I mean, that's an awfully big risk for a kid to take. Northwestern, a lot of these kids come there for the degree. And if you're 2 years in, 3 years in, or if you're obviously your fourth year, I got a feeling they're going to stay. If nothing else, then to get a degree rather than, it's the known rather than the unknown. So, yeah, I assume that there's going to be some defections. I don't know how many. I would think that there's going to be some. And, they just announced a little while ago that, as you mentioned, the staff is going to be retained. So, I don't know. It's a mess. Like, that's why you ask the next 2 years. I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah, you're worried that you're trying to see what happens in the next 2 hours, much less the next couple of days. Do you feel like, okay, Fitzgerald's going to sue Northwestern? We know that, right? He feels like he's being betrayed in the worst way, and maybe also reclaiming some of the money, the $53 million or whatever's left in his contract. But how about the players who feel like they were the ones abused? Do you feel like they might sue? And what is the legal part? Do they sue Northwestern? Can they sue Fitzgerald? What do they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really don't know. I don't know what the legal liability. I would assume it'd be program. Maybe Fitzgerald too. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that yet.
Right.
Even the person that made the initial allegations, I haven't heard any threats of a lawsuit or anything like that. The kid definitely has an axe to grind, but I don't think it went as far as lawsuits. I haven't heard about that. But yeah, Fitz will get his day in court, and I think President Schill is going to have to explain how the allegations, which led to a 2-week suspension on Friday, became termination on Monday when nothing new came, and they had an agreement. Apparently, Fitz referenced that in his statement that they came to a mutual agreement on 2 weeks on Friday, and then on Monday he got terminated. So Dr. Schill's he's got some explaining to do.
Yeah. Louie, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. I know it's been a busy time for you since Friday. Thanks for your time, and good luck moving forward and covering it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys having me.
Louie Vaccher from Wildcat Report. Thank you very much. At Wildcat Report on Twitter. A lot of great questions.